being 11:02 here in Argentina and 4 p.m. in Europe. We were going to start this webinar, so thank you very much to all to join us. My name is Edgardo Manciti. I'm the Secretary General of ISA. Today, we have a very important webinar with our partners of Stenden University. And the topic for today is Teachers are Researcher Practitioners, Building Bridges Between Schools-Based Practices and Research Through Design-Based Education. We have as our speakers, if everyone can silence their microphone, please. As our speakers, we have Dr. Erika van der Meersbrugge. She's a lecturer researcher in international teacher education at NHLStenden University of Applied Science. After a career in international schools, she joined higher education. She focuses on alternative research methods in education and its interest in the application of utopian and speculative thinking, the punk ethos and anarchist organizational philosophy to reimagine international education policy, research and practice. And we have Dr. Deborah Williams Walandi. Dr. Deborah, hello, how are you? Can you silence your mics, please? Thank you. Dr. Deborah is the Program Manager of the International Teacher Education Consortium at NHLStenden, where she also works as a lecturer researcher. Having held a variety of roles in international schools, from teacher to school director, she's now exploring the concepts of professional identity, global citizenship, education, and intercultural communities within teacher education. So as you can see, we have a lot of values and a lot of paths that we work together. Some of the students of Stenden University have been our interns in ISA schools. We have received 2 teachers last year here in St. Catherine's Moorlands in Argentina and in different parts of the world, also in the school in Istanbul. And the idea is to strengthen our links with them. We work with them, trying to help them that they are going to present today some of the master in international education and how the teachers can be practitioners and also researchers. So I'm going to give the floor to Deborah and Erika. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Edgardo, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world, to everyone. We're delighted to be able to spend some time with you this afternoon. And thank you to ISA for supporting us in strengthening the relationship between NHLStenden and ISA, a very important partnership. I'm going to start by sharing our slide deck, give you that a few moments. And when that is visible to everyone, we will begin. Okay, I see heads nodding. All right. So, okay.
Yes, good afternoon from the Netherlands. So as Edgardo has already said, we are both working at NHLStenden University of Applied Sciences. And the Applied Sciences part is actually really interesting because that allows us as a university to really build strong connections between what students do as part of their study and the professional field. So Deborah and I are both connected to the International Teacher Education Department, which is one of the many departments that our university has. So there's a hotel management department, for example, as well. So we are connected to international teacher education. And the purpose of our session today is to provide you a little bit of insight in how those connections are made between the professional field and the university, by zooming in on what we call design-based education, or short DBE. Before we do that, I'll hand over to Deborah, and she will explain a little bit which programs we offer within the International Teacher Education Department.
Yeah, I'm getting a lot of background noise.
Yes, I think we have a microphone that is open. Mukajit, can you please silence your mic?
Okay, great. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
So just very briefly, to give you a sense, if you are unfamiliar with our International Teacher Education Program at NHLStenden, a brief overview of the 3 degrees that are offered here. Some of you may be familiar with ITEPS, or the International Teacher Education for Primary Schools program. That started, it's a 4-year bachelor program that started about 10 years ago. And students go through the 4 years doing teaching practice in every year of their course, sometimes in your schools. As Edgardo mentioned, you may have had some of our students working with you, and we do really rely a lot on our international school relationships in order to make sure that our future teachers have authentic experiences in international schooling before they enter the field. In 2018, we added the ITES, or the Bachelor for International Teacher Education for Secondary Schools, and equally those students will also every year go into international schools all throughout the world in order to gain hands-on experience, and that really reflects our commitment to making sure that theory and practice are constantly touching each other, and there's a constant relationship between what you learn in the classroom here, what you see when you're out in the world, in the field, and what you then bring back. And we're also delighted that in February of this year, we launched a Master in International Teacher Education, which is a part-time master's, so over 2 years, for people who are teaching at present, so either in a part-time capacity or a full-time capacity, and we'll talk to you a little bit more about that as we go through this presentation.
As we said at the start, our university is a design-based education university, which means that design-based educational practices are part and parcel of all programs offered at university, and thus also the 3 programs that Deborah has just mentioned. Now, this acronym DBE is something that we use on a daily basis, and I can imagine that you're not necessarily familiar with the terminology, but if I mention inquiry-based learning, problem-based learning, or concept-based learning, I think that will resonate far more with your practices in your international school. So you could actually say that a design-based approach to education, whether it's research or practice, is very much in line with or similar to an inquiry, problem-solving, concept-oriented approach to teaching and learning. Just to give you, sorry, if you go back for a second, thank you, Edgardo. Just to give you briefly the background of why we're doing it. Well, just like you're practicing your schools, the idea is that we want students to engage with complex challenges that make up the real world, that are part of their professional context, even their personal context. So a design-based approach to education allows us to do that. What does this mean in practice? As Deborah will explain in a minute, there is a kind of systemic approach to engaging in a design-based project. There's a cycle students go through, but it means that students will develop an artifact, a product, an approach to thinking, a particular practice, a policy that is almost tailor-made, if you wish, or bespoke to a particular professional context. So for our students, at whatever level they are working, whether it's bachelor's or master's level, they will develop artifacts, tools, etc., that are being designed for their schools where they're doing their teaching practice at bachelor's level, or the schools where they are professionally active when they work at master's level. So students will come up with something that is fulfilling the needs of the school context, that they try and test, so prototype in the school, and also they have opportunities at our university to experiment with other stakeholders in the professional field.
This slide, which is quite a busy slide, is, I think, a nice illustration of the importance of the iterative process in what Elke was referring to in the design-based education process. So if you look for a moment at the dark blue research question from the practice, that's essentially where all of our questions start. So we tend to want to, particularly as educational leaders, find the solutions because we have a pressing problem that we want to resolve. And the design-based approach forces the thinker or the researcher to begin with the environment. So while we tend to want to run ahead with the solution, this process, which you may be familiar with as part similar to the MYP design process, forces you at the start to really empathize with the stakeholders who are involved in the problem. So rather than the problem emerging from, rather than the response to the problem emerging from someone's mind or a small group of people, there really has to be a slowing down of the process so that the stakeholders are the first people who are part of the thinking about what the problem really even is. Then if you move ahead to the light blue part of this, the counterclockwise, the light blue arrow, that only after that empathizing phase takes place does the problem question even emerge. Because we may think that we have a problem question that we are able to research, but it's only after engaging that we can rephrase what that question is. And I won't explain all of the phases because I imagine that many of you are familiar with the design cycle because it appears in different forms, different formats. But I think that what we want to emphasize in the way that this approach to solving problems in educational settings like your schools can be helpful is that when teachers or practitioners, they are looking at the problem from the inside. So the problem setting of the cycle is then followed by a very sort of open generation of ideas. We sometimes call that blue sky thinking, where we think creatively and we think outside the box. And that too involves stakeholders who are perhaps not only teachers and people working within the school, but also students, parents, and the wider community itself. And after that broad moment of red here, there's a honing in on, okay, we've thought about this, we've done significant research in terms of our stakeholders and in terms of conceptual understandings in the field. How can we now design a response to the problem that we've defined? And in this yellow, let's try and apply it. But I think the strength of this, as we know, is that we don't stop with one try. And this almost seems like the infinity sign. We don't go on for an infinite amount of time, but we certainly invite an iterative process where that first attempt at a response to the problem, in whatever form it might be, is questioned, and we use that information to feed back into the cycle a second or a third time. Now, we are talking about teachers who are research practitioners. This is obviously the approach that we take in our bachelor's level course too. So we begin by inviting our students in years 1 and 2 and 3 to use this cycle in their teaching practice assignments. And Elke is going to talk for a moment about an example of that at bachelor's level. This is a year 2 student. But we thought that it was a good illustration, rather than speaking conceptually about this, to actually see how this translates.
So this is credits to the group of students who made this. So as Deborah said, these were year 2 students of last year, actually, who were tasked with designing a maths tool. So they had to come up with a mathematical tool during their teaching practice that would serve the needs and requirements of their teaching practice school. And the process is, as Deborah has just explained, students have to go through this design cycle in developing their product, which means we do not only assess the final product, which is a maths tool, but also the process towards that. So students keep a research diary, reflect on the different phases of development, and are also graded for that. So this is the Dark Wizard of Numberland, which is quite a creative name. So they went for a particular theme. And this tool focuses on fractions, because that was at that time that the students were there in their school. That was the maths focus, and the teachers had had made clear that there was a real need to have more practice in fractions. So what students did is they came up with a tool that practices fractions through 6 activities, and the screenshots you see here are taken from the teacher's manual, because what students have to do is, as they design the product, they also have to develop a teacher manual that explains the purpose of the tool, the kind of special features. In this case, the 2 major features of the tool are that it allows for differentiation and inclusive strategies, which are 2 requirements for our year 2 students. So this means that any teacher who gets their hands on this should be able to apply or put the game into practice in their classroom by going through the manual. So the next slide, I mean, there are 6 activities in total. So it's a kind of carousel type system themed around the dark wizard. And for example, activity 5 focuses on turning mixed numbers into improper fractions and vice versa. There's a range of digital materials that go with this. So little instruction cards, solution cards, and so on and so forth, which kind of allows anyone to implement or use this game in any kind of setting, as long as they have those basic materials. The other thing that is important to know, I'm getting quite a bit of feedback again. I'll try and...
Yes, I think it's...
yeah, okay, yeah. So by... sometimes students develop a tangible physical product, but we really encourage them to provide materials digitally, so it's more accessible to schools elsewhere. And it also allows them to then share their work in what we call a maths exhibition. So we do a proper exhibition for local and international schools in the area, who then come to our university and try and test those tools, which is another kind of way of prototyping and testing the tool, which is the 4th or 5th phase of the design cycle. The other thing that is noteworthy about this particular tool is that students worked on a role allocation in this game. So students have to decide in groups whether they want to be the speaking witch or the material wizard, which really also taps into giving students agency. So agency and responsibility in how they are collaborating in or throughout the game, but also what kind of tasks and responsibilities they want to take upon them. So we see this as a good example of a maths tool for year 2 group of students who have really thought about a context oriented maths tool that is inclusive, that is allowing for differentiation, that is well designed and applicable across a range of other school contexts. Deborah, over to you to give us a little bit of more research-oriented background, why we keep doing this.
Yeah, we had talked about what the benefits of this are for the practitioner of research. So thinking about the teacher as practitioner. And we know from research from Mentor et al. In 2011 that this process of being both a practitioner and a researcher allows for a deep engagement with reflective practice. We also know that it's a type of professional development that involves the individual, but also the team with whom the individual is working in their school. So the research project that one person may be developing obviously touches on the work and the thinking process of others who are working along with them. And the impact on school improvement because of this team effort and because of the contextual base of the research is significant. We also know that there are advantages to using the DB approach. We talked a bit about the co-creation, and I'd like to also emphasize how significant the fact that these questions and the responses to the questions are emerging from the contexts. There's a fairly recent publication, Mintrop, Zump and Barrel in 2019, which we'll put into the chat if you want to access it. It's open access, which is called Design-Based School Improvement and Research for Education Leaders. And what the authors are arguing there is that rather than relying on an outside source of information for or an outside response to an issue that a school is facing, the design mode, because it's set up as sequenced learning opportunities for specific members of an organization that are created, as we said earlier, in an iterative way and repeated through trial and error until a satisfactory outcome has been accomplished, really strengthen the engagement of the group. Because as we know from our international school settings as well, each context is very, very different from the other. So what may work well in one school doesn't necessarily work well in the other. So while we encourage in our research groups to get together and share experiences from different international schools, there's also a lot of strength in a small group working together on a problem and going through this cycle and taking the time to research and brainstorm and engage within the school itself. So this iterative trial and error, guided by theories of action and, of course, robust data collection, which we haven't spoken a lot about, but the data collection element of this is really important and what to do with it, means that if we consider that educational settings are complex and that they're extremely content sensitive, both in terms of geography, but also culture and time, that organizational change, which could happen, happens really because of adult learning through the process of this DBE approach to problem solving. We've been talking now for about 25 minutes, I think, so I wanted to just take a moment to ask each of you from your context to reflect on what you might view to be a problem that you would like a teacher researcher to be addressing in your school. So if you had the opportunity, and as school leaders, you do have an opportunity to create a context and a question for teacher practitioners in many cases. It's part of a conversation of professional development that you're involved in. Certainly, educational leaders are one body of those stakeholders that we talked about at the beginning in that empathizing stage. What would you want a teacher researcher to be looking at today in your school? And if you could write that in the chat, and we'll be quiet for a few minutes while you reflect on that question. And please feel free to use the chat to do that.
I suggest that as you're thinking maybe and potentially typing, we can move on and illustrate to you potentially some of the ideas that you might have. Edgardo, you talk about how we can incorporate, apply, adjust trends in international education in your schools. I'm assuming you talk about, matters of diversity, decolonizing the curriculum, well-being of students and staff, those kinds of aspects. How do we make that context specific for our schools? That could be actually a really nice master level design based project. So just to continue, what we showed you earlier was an example of a maths tool that is clearly at bachelor's level. When we started designing the master degree that we have launched in February, we really wanted to take the design-based approach to education further, based on the research that is really rich and substantial by now, and our own experiences as well, because we are, international educators who have also done extensive research at academic level, and trying to merge those worlds is really what lies at the heart of design-based education. So what we then decided for our Master of International Teacher Education is to make it a requirement for the final thesis project to be a design-based project. So this means that students who might potentially be staff in your school, who embark on this 2-year part-time blended program, will do an 18 European credit project. That is the summative assessment of the course, and that corresponds with approximately 500 hours of study. So it's a full final master project, but completely oriented towards a design-based approach. So what we ask students to do is to identify and connect their educational queries based on their own classroom and their own schools, and to do a critical investigation of their context in conjunction with a strong theoretical analysis on a topic of interest. So as Deborah already also signaled, a design-based approach to education doesn't just mean creating something. There's a whole research process behind it. So students would, for example, interview school leaders, they would do questionnaires, they would do observations, they would have focus groups, they might engage in some ethnographic practices, whatever suits the needs of the school and helps them to empathize with the needs of their own schools and their school contexts. So the result of that, going through the design cycle, which could take up to, let's say a year and a half, the outcome of that is a product or a policy or an innovation that fits their school context. And they have to, there has to be evidence of strong theoretical and practical knowledge and skills that have been developed and implemented throughout the project. Students use the design cycle and ultimately have to produce, there are 3 components, if you wish, to this project. There's, of course, the product as well as a manual. So we also want students to develop a manual for a professional audience. They do have to do an oral presentation of their product for a panel of assessors, whereby also stakeholders from the field will be invited. So you could imagine that you might end up joining one of those presentations as a professional coming from the field, also assessing the quality of the product of the students. And lastly, there is also a requirement for students to produce an academic written piece. It's still a master's degree at a university, so we put it as a requirement that students still need to be able to report in an academically professional manner on their research, as well as on the process of designing this artifact or whatever it is that they have developed, and reflecting also on that process, thereby also taking into considerations what are the strengths of my product within my own school context? How might this product or this policy of this approach be used elsewhere knowing very well that international school context can differ greatly. But so that's in sum what the final design-based project looks like. And I see, it's very hard to talk and read, but I have noticed in the chat that Pablo, for example, suggests something like how do we develop internationalism as a skill for teachers within their school context through, for example, collaborative STEAM projects. I'm just reading what you wrote, Pablo, but that would be a really interesting inquiry for a master's degree student. I think we should take note of this, Deborah, and maybe suggest it to someone. But that would be, that would be a very specific case. I think it's what we also see, and that's the final bit of feedback on how we see this at master level. Students sometimes start with an idea like this, but through their empathizing and their investigation and data collection, they realize, hang on, actually there's a different need. So what regularly happens is that students also change, tweak, or adjust their initial ideas based on their empathizing in the initial phases of their project. So you might end up, Pablo, with the idea of, I'm going to focus on STEAM projects, but you might end up with saying, oh, actually, we need to look at our school policy when it comes to internationalism. That's exactly why this empathizing phase, those early stages of the design cycle, are so essential, that you really work context specific and that you go in with an open mind with an idea, but that students really develop or ideate a project or a product that doesn't just respond to what they would want to do as an individual, but also responds to what the environment needs. Of course, we've skipped a few steps. Now we have illustrated what the final project of the master degree looks like, but I'll hand over to Deborah now so she can explain a little bit what the structure of the entire program is.
Yeah, thank you, Elke. We're particularly excited about the opportunities that a final project such as this offer, because certainly there are many master's programs that exist that offer interesting content. But what we're committed to doing in designing this master's, and in particular embedding the design-based philosophy behind it, was to ensure that the practitioner researcher was doing something that was of value for themselves and for their school context. So the idea of actually using the problems that arise from the school rather than imagined problems or problems that are solely conceptual was really embedded in the way we thought about building the content and relating it to the final product. But we did want to give you an opportunity to have a look at the content side of the master's course while we're here together this afternoon. So you can see that there are a number of core courses, and then there are 2 specializations. So the core courses are required of all students who embark on the master's. I won't read those out to you, but I will make a note. Will note that the education, research, and academic writing course is something that all students must do right at the start. And that's because we recognize that different bachelor's programs and different people's pathways towards a master's degree may differ. And education, research, and academic writing is something that we feel is an important baseline for everyone. So that's where everyone must begin. And those core courses take place over the summer in a 3-week residential. So someone who's interested in attending the master's would spend 2 summer sessions in the Netherlands for 3 weeks, covering those core courses. And that's also really an important part of creating a community, because we have a beautiful community in ISA, and we also want to carry over that idea of a community of learners through the masters. And although we embrace the opportunities that an online environment offers in terms of exchange, meeting people face to face and spending some time in those more spontaneous conversations that can arise And that kind of energy that comes from being together and thinking through problems is something we wanted to maintain as well. So those core courses take place during the summers, as I said, but there's also really important work that happens in the specializations. So students choose one specialization, and in that choice, they're thereby committing to 3 online modules. The titles of those modules you can see here, and those modules do take place online, one in what we in the Northern Hemisphere call our autumn, and one in what we would call our spring, but a period of time of 16 weeks online. Those courses are quite specialized in that there's a coaching element that is embedded in each of those. So each student, because of that online setting, and because of the fact that we know from our recent experiences globally with online learning that having some individual follow-up is important to keep going. Otherwise, there's the risk of really feeling quite detached from what you're doing. So we've built in a coaching element, which means that each student has a coach who is one of the lecturers on the modules during those online, those courses. And over the course of the 2 years, the expectation is, because these are professionals who are working in the field in your schools, that there's a constant back and forth between what they're learning in their modules, what they're learning in their core courses, and how that then translates to what they're seeing in their world of work. So we want to leave a little bit of time for Q&A, and we will do that now. If you have any questions about any aspect of this, as we said, we're excited to have started with our first cohort, but we're excited that this idea of design-based education can be translated. We talk about problem-based learning. We use that in our schools with primary students and secondary students, but we're excited about what we're seeing here as a young university, how that's applied with bachelor and master's students as well. So if there are any questions, if you prefer to write in the chat, I do see that I have a sign that says some people in the chat may not actually be able to use the chat because of the way you're connected. So if that's the case for you, if you find you've been writing and your chat message hasn't appeared to us, we apologize for that, but please do just yell out, raise your hand, and we will take any questions that you might have.
Also for your reference, so the general email is put on the slide here. So if questions arise later on after some contemplation, then do feel free to email us. We've also put a link to our website in the chat just now, as that gives a little bit more background information on the content of the courses, for example, and the requirements for enrollment, fees, duration, and so on and so forth.
Alia has a question. Thank you, Alia, about whether there's a partnership option with schools and can the program be rolled out as a school cohort? That's a really exciting idea, I think. At the moment, we have a school that has decided to send 3 of their teachers together to begin the masters together. And the thinking behind that is similar to that idea. So certainly we would encourage that, because I think being able to talk in the staff room about projects that are coming out, about readings, about assignments, is certainly benefits the individuals, but also the school. I'm not sure, Alia, whether your question also relates to perhaps a partnership with the university and a given international school, and what you imagine that could look like. So I'm not able to answer entirely, but certainly if that's something that you'd like to pursue, you could follow up with an email with us if you have something more specific in mind with the word partnership. But certainly the idea of using this master's as a learning opportunity that more than one person in your school can benefit from in order to address some of the, or one of the issues that you agree on is needing looking at, is something that we have thought about, and we think that there's a really positive opportunity to use it this way.
Yeah, I can add to that, because I'm currently involved in the course that we're offering, where we have 3 students from the same school. And interestingly enough, they're all different subject teachers. So one is a PE teacher, I believe, and the other one is a German teacher, and the other one is a generalist, I think. And it's very interesting how they provide different perspectives on the school when they are engaging in online discussions or they're presenting work. They do have a different view on the context of the school, so you get this really rich insight into their international school. So I also really like the idea of offering this to staff from the same school as a kind of longer term professional development. I find it fascinating to see, and they are also sometimes saying, oh, I had never looked at thus and thus in such a way, or that's interesting that you say that. I'm experiencing this very differently. So there's really interesting insights emerging from those conversations. Edgardo, I think you have your hand up. Yeah.
Yes, I wanted to know how do you manage, because in some schools or some international schools, they need also to do the national curriculum. And sometimes the international curriculum has to be mixed with the national curriculum, depending on each country. So how do you give that to the students? How do you give the different perspectives? And also, is there a space of an elective course for management? Because some Master in International Education teachers have a coordination and they have to manage people, budgets, everything that is the part that makes the school going. And sometimes there are people that are very important in that aspect of the school, that maybe they work with the accountant or with the head of school in order to program different aspects or trips or whatever. And if they get some elective where they can have that, because sometimes what happened here at school have a lot of views in the academic point of view, but sometimes you have to merge it with the business part in order for the school to move on, right? Depending if it's a school that is managed by a family or by an individual, or managed by a group of a fan group like Comunità Inspire, etc. Right?
Edgardo, I think there's two questions in your question. So maybe Deborah and I, we can split the work. So there's a question around, management training, basically, and there's a question around national requirements. Deborah, are you okay with me maybe responding to the first part, the one about management? So as is illustrated on this slide, we offer two specializations, and the first specialization, if you wish, in the middle, focuses on leadership and change. So students who are choosing that specialization are very likely students who want to kind of move forward in their career, going into middle leadership in their schools, and potentially also senior leadership. So these courses focus on reform, policy, change management, teacher leadership as well, which is a very important aspect, particularly in the international school context. But they are not management courses. So the educational, the adjective educational is really important here. At no point are we really explicitly focusing on administrative processes. We touch upon policies, we touch upon, transnational policies, dynamics, trends, but we're not looking at the management side of things, because we feel that there's a number of high quality training centers out there, principal training centers and so on, who do offer that. And for us, as a focus for the program in its entirety, it's really about the educational side of things. It's really about how do we pedagogically responsibly engage in education in international context. So to summarize the answer, this specialization would definitely be very useful for staff who want to move into leadership positions at middle and senior level, but it wouldn't focus on the managerial side of things much.
And how much time would that take?
So the entire program is 2 years part-time. So students, we have a February start. So students who started this year in February will be done by February 2025. We know that most of our students work full-time, so there's a commitment of, and it's always hard to quantify, but there's a commitment of, say, between 10 and 15 hours a week for students who are, following the program as it is structured.
Thank you very much.
Deborah, do you want to add something about?
I was going to go back to your other question, Edgardo. It sounded to me like it was a topic area of concern and interest. And I think that in that respect, it could be potentially something that a given master's student would want to embrace as a project to look at. Certainly, it relates to some of the topics that we look at when we're looking at international education from a global perspective, because developments over the past 5-10 years have meant that the interpretation of what international education is has expanded and multiplied, and the interpretation of that, which includes requiring national education end exams to be taken, is a development that isn't new everywhere. It has been around for a long time in some places, but certainly it's something that some schools have to deal with. So it's a topic that we address. But then the question you ask of how might one actually move in that arena would be very specific to the given context, which again goes back to the idea of design-based education being rooted in context. And just to add slightly to, of course, I agree with what Elke said about the emphasis from the managerial point of view on one possible interpretation of a problem or an issue that a student might want to look at might involve some of those questions that you're talking about. So when we look at the specialization, educational leadership and change in international schools, understanding that you need to have a knowledge base that includes financial implications or budgetary requirements or the legal parameters of action in a given space would be part of the empathizing phase. That doesn't mean that we're creating experts in the legal running of schools in public or private spheres, but building a knowledge base of the types of questions and the types of information that need to be used would be what we would expect.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions that anyone would like to ask? I see, it looks to me like someone is typing, but I haven't seen the message actually come out. So I'm not sure if that goes back to our problem. I see Irfan typing in the chat, but I'm not sure if that's translating into something that we can then see. Okay, thank you, Irfan. We did get your message. Thank you very much. All right. Are there any other questions before we say goodbye? And thank you for spending some time with us this afternoon. As Elke said, we're happy to respond via email. So if something does come up that you're wondering about, if you want more information about anything that we've said here today, we'd be happy to meet with you online or answer in an email.
Yes, and I will also send afterwards the recording of the event and also your emails and your contacts for people to write to you directly.
Okay, great. Well, thank you again. It was nice to see you all this afternoon. Thanks for listening and enjoy the rest of your day wherever you may be. And thank you again, Edgardo and Jorge, who is helping in the background, for supporting us this afternoon with this presentation and hosting us.
Yes.
Thank
Thanks
you,
a lot.
Ibra. Thank you.
Goodbye.
And let's hope for you to have a lot of students in order that we have more teachers and international teachers all over the world. That I think that there are resources that a lot of schools need, and to be well prepared to the new education after the pandemic. And sometimes it's very difficult to say what's international education and what's not. But I think that this Master International Teacher Education program gives a lot of tools and a lot of knowledge to teachers in the international arena. So thank you very much, everyone, and also Stenden for creating this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.